Everyone loves a good awakening. That single moment where everything suddenly changes. The pieces of the puzzle finally fall into place, and time itself seems to slow down. If you really think about it, your favorite moment in anime is likely an awakening or the result of one. But what makes an awakening so good? And why are some awakenings literally seen as the pinnacle of anime while others get labeled as a Deus Ex Machina or lazy plot armor? Well, to figure that out, I think we need to clarify what an awakening actually is first. I'm sure you already have a clear image in your head. Maybe it's Gojo grasping infinity, or Goku going Super Saiyan for the first time, which are all great examples that we'll get into in a minute, but awakenings are actually way more flexible as a plot device than you might think. Because awakenings don't have to, and often aren't physical. At the heart of it, an awakening is better described as an epiphany. It's a moment of clarity that makes things possible that were unimaginable beforehand. So sure, that new possibility might be beating the brakes off of some overpowered villain, but it could also be something like gaining the courage to say what you've been too afraid to say, or even in the opposite direction, letting go of something that was holding you back. And one of the best examples of a non-traditional awakening is Thorfinn from Vinland Saga. For most of the story, Thorfinn is consumed by revenge. He's a child soldier, growing up chasing the man who killed his father, becoming more and more hollow in the process. But his real awakening, it doesn't come in the form of suddenly swinging his sword in a new type of way, or some last-minute berserk. It comes in a purely psychological sense, when he loses everything, and instead of clinging to his anger, he realizes it's time to change, that he no longer wants to hurt people, and that he can choose another path. But in a way, you could easily argue this makes him physically weaker, because he loses his aggressiveness and animalistic rage that made him a demon on the battlefield. And that's the thing, awakenings aren't just about gaining power, they're about realizing something, about breaking through a wall and overcoming something that you could never before. And that's why an awakening like Gojo's works so well. When we see the flashbacks of pre-awakening Gojo, we're constantly told that he's a prodigy, that his cursed energy is boundless, that his potential is infinite. But even with all that natural talent, there's still one thing he can't do. He can't fully grasp the concept of infinity. It's not a physical limitation, it's a mental block, a gap in understanding that keeps him from becoming the strongest. So when he's on the brink of death, stabbed through the neck by Toji and left for dead, what saves him isn't raw strength, it's clarity. In that moment, something clicks. He grasps infinity, and suddenly the impossible becomes reality. But it's more than just a power-up, it's a symbolic rebirth. That moment changes Gojo, not just in strength, but in who he is. He becomes colder, more detached. His relationships start to shift, especially with Geto, and his role in the story completely changes. Because now he isn't just a promising student, or the heir to the Gojo clan. Now he is the strongest, full stop. And there are tons of references here to Buddhist imagery and themes of enlightenment, but you don't need to catch all of that to feel the significance of this change. Because it's clear that Gojo's awakening doesn't just affect him, it changes the entire direction of the story and the world that he inhabits. Because of this, Gojo's awakening isn't about gaining a new technique. It's about becoming someone who's finally stepped into the role the world had always expected of him, and realizing just how lonely that role can be. Which is why Gojo's awakening is so impactful. Not just because of how drastically it shifts his role in the story and the world of Jujutsu Kaisen itself, but because it feels earned. It isn't some random power-up or last-minute Deus Ex Machina, because everything had been leading to that moment. Grasping infinity wasn't a hidden ability. It was a concept that he was actively trying to learn for years. And all it took was an incredibly near-death experience that made Gojo feel something he had never felt before, allowing him to become something greater than he had ever been. And yeah, it looked insanely cool too, which definitely helped cement it as one of the most iconic awakenings in anime history. But as much as I love Gojo's character, and that moment specifically, I don't think it reflects a massive change in his mentality or personal philosophy. You could argue that he becomes more distant and emotionally isolated, sure, but the real transformation is in his role within the story. His awakening marks the moment he stops being a talented student with potential and fully steps into the identity the world had placed on him since birth, the strongest. Which is why I want to take a look at another awakening, one that represents a much deeper, more personal kind of change, that being Gon's awakening in Hunter x Hunter. Where Gojo's growth is defined by intellectual clarity and enlightenment, Gon's is driven by change in his sense of self and a complete sacrifice of his own humanity. After re-encountering Pito, the royal guard responsible for Kite's death, something in Gon breaks. Kite had been more than a mentor. He was a symbol of safety and strength, almost a father figure to Gon. And up to that point, Gon had always carried himself with a kind of innocent resilience. Even in dangerous situations, he was lighthearted, idealistic, and emotionally grounded. But Kite's death shattered all of that. It forced Gon to confront how cruel the world could be, and how fragile life truly was. But more than that, it proved how powerless Gon still was to protect what mattered the most. So Gon makes a choice, not just to fight, but to sacrifice everything. His potential, his future, and even his life. He wills his body to grow into the adult he would have become, trading away time, innocence, and identity for the fleeting chance to win. And this isn't some clever loophole or hidden reserve of strength. It's a self-destructive wish. A moment where desire overwhelms reason, and power is born not from clarity, but from despair. And that's what makes Gon's awakening so unforgettable. It's not a power-up, it's a collapse. It doesn't feel like plot convenience, it feels like plot consequence. It doesn't elevate his character, it exposes it. And in doing so, it forces us to question what an awakening really means. Because this isn't about becoming your best self. It's about becoming something new, something unrecognizable, just to survive the weight of your own grief. And that's exactly what Gon's awakening does. It changes everything. Not just what he can do, but who he is. It's the moment we see the boy we thought we knew disappear. Because if you had told me after the first episode of Hunter x Hunter, or even after 90 episodes, that Gon would go on to brutally kill a sentient and intelligent being who was actively trying to avoid violence, or that he'd threaten, no promise, to kill an innocent little girl if his demands weren't met quickly enough, I wouldn't have believed you. But that's the power of this moment. It's not just about what Gon does, it's about how far he's fallen, and how much further he's willing to fall. And that's why Gon's awakening stands out, not just in Hunter x Hunter, but in anime as a whole, because it dares to show that sometimes becoming stronger doesn't mean becoming better. It means giving something up. It means losing parts of yourself you might never get back. Sometimes an awakening doesn't mark the beginning of a new arc, it marks the end of the person you used to be. And that's what makes Gon's transformation so unforgettable. He doesn't just go farther than he should, he goes farther than he can come back from. Because now he knows he's capable of the very cruelty and darkness that once devastated him. That he's no longer just a witness to it, but that it lives in him. And maybe even more devastating is the fact that he has to live with that. With the weight of what he did, with the knowledge of what he would have done. And the worst part is that he gave up not just his innocence, but his future as well. Because this awakening doesn't just change who he is in the moment, it changes the story he was supposed to have. The version of Gon who could have grown stronger over time, who could have become a hero, who still had hope, that version is gone. His awakening cost him not just his body and his nen, but the potential of everything he could have become. And that's what makes awakenings so beautiful when they're done right in anime. They can flip a story on its head, they can shift a character's beliefs, redefine their path, and push them towards either triumph or tragedy. But no matter what, the person who awakens is never the same as they were before.